Facebook now and YouTube. Hello, Facebook. Hello, YouTube. We're going to get started in 1 minute with this wonderful program on Kaiten, the Japanese suicide submarine program. And it seems like we have 10 guests or so connected somehow to the USS Mississinewa and to Kaiten. And boy, am I eager to start this conversation today. And I know it's a big conversation that we're going to try and continue next week. So this is just part one.
Hey, I'd like to run a little stage.
I would, because I'm Native American person, and I'm the chief of a tribe.
Yes.
And anytime anytime we have any kind of ceremony, we call this a ceremony. Anytime we have a meeting with people who are very important, like you guys are, we always have a little blessing first. We don't just go ahead and start talking about stuff. So if you don't mind, it won't only take me a minute. And
Windsong, can you wait 1 second? I want to admit we still have a lot of people waiting to be admitted, and I want them all to be. I want them to be all a part of it. Okay.
All right.
Okay. Let me play our theme song, and then we will start admitting people.
Yeah, you're the captain.
Everybody, and welcome to Greatest Generation Live. Thank you for joining us on this Sunday, December 13th. My name is Todd DiPastino. I'm the director of the Veterans Breakfast Club, and this is a Veterans Breakfast Club production. And the Veterans Breakfast Club is a nonprofit based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've been around for a dozen years. And what we do is harness the power of storytelling to connect and heal and educate and inspire. And we do that through veteran storytelling programs just like this one. We've been doing them in person for many years. And this year we turned virtual. And boy, do we have a blockbuster of a program today. It's just apparent just from the conversation that we were having before 4 p.m. here, that this is going to be a big conversation, and I would love to continue it next week because we have a lot of guests and a lot of perspectives on a singular event that took place, and I will share with you what the event that we're talking about. A singular event that took place on November 20th, 1944. I will share with you footage of this event. It was on that day. And Ulithi, which is a coral reef in the Caroline Islands, that the USS Mississinewa exploded, and it was attacked by a new weapon, a Japanese weapon called the Kaiten. And the Kaiten was a suicide submarine or suicide torpedo submersible program. And this was the first deployed Kaiten of the war. And we have joining us today several people who are connected in one way or another with this horrific explosion. The Mississinewa was an oiler, and it was packed with hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel. And you could see that thick black smoke going up in 1944. Quite something. We're going to talk about that event. We're going to talk about Kaiten. With us, we have Mike Mair, who is the world's leading expert really on Kaiten. He wrote this beautifully written book that we will talk about in a bit called Kaiten, Japan's Secret Manned Suicide Submarine and the First American Ship it sank in World War II. Mike's father, John, was a survivor on the USS Mississinewa. and then we have many other children of survivors, children of those who were killed on the Mississinewa. We have joining us John Rulmal he's on Guam now. Hello, John, where it is Monday morning at 7 a.m.
Wow.
And he has very graciously got up early and joined us on this program. But he lives on Ulithi, which is a coral atoll, total population of maybe 1,000 people. And but he hasn't been able to go back to Ulithi. We'll have him kind of share his story. But first, before we even get started, we had a wonderful offer from one of our distinguished guests and somebody I just met, talked on the phone a few weeks ago, just met right now. This is Windsong Blake. Windsong is a World War II veteran. He joined the Navy at age 16, I believe. And Windsong is a Wampanoag Indian. He's Native American. And Windsong has offered the blessing. Windsong,
Yes,
thank you for joining us.
yes. I want to bless all you people first. The Great Spirit wants to talk to you guys and say hello and say blessings that you were able to be here today. And I want to bless all the men and women that's been in the service, whether it be Navy, Army, Marine, or the women and men who are in the hospitals, taking care of all those people that are sick, frontline people. Bless them all. And bless you, sir, also when you get home. And especially I want to bless Mike. Mike, I want to bless you especially for all that you've done. And Kathy, I want to bless you for all of you giving me all the different things of the people on the ship and your son and your father. And I want to bless Rex. Rex is a guy who kept talking to me and sending me emails. He was with me on the ship when we seen the explosion and everything. And he worked in the laundry. And of course, I was in the laundry a lot because I was a steward's mate and up there changing the officers' bedding and all this stuff for the officers. You know, had a lot of dirty clothes and stuff we had to bring down to the laundry. So him and I really got very friendly, and he kept talking to me until he died a couple of years ago. So, all right, thank you, everybody. Bless you, and have a safe trip home.
Thank you, Windsong, so much. I appreciate that. That's the first time we've had a Native American blessing here on our Greatest Generation Live. And I do want to let people know that we do these kind of live programs 3 days a week. We do Greatest Generation Live, which is focused on World War II stories, but we also have a Monday night happy hour at 7 p.m. We'll have that tomorrow night. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we also have a virtual breakfast on Wednesdays at 9 a.m., all Eastern time. Everybody is welcome to join us. And I am going to be twisting the arms of some of the first-time attendees today who are joining us, who are veterans and who are joining us, asking them if they could come back at some point and share more of their own service story. I know today we're focusing on the USS Mississinewa. Oh, hey, and since this is a Navy story and many of you are Navy vets, look what I have. One of our Navy vets gave me this, a bosun's pipe. Don't you dare call it a whistle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you remember a bosun's pipe, Windsong?
Oh yeah, I remember. Wait a minute.
We can play dueling bosun's pipes. I'm terrible at it. Hey, he has one.
They can see you.
Yeah, play it, Windsong.
I can hardly hold it. Yeah, get up there.
All right. I'm terrible at it, but there we go. And then one last thing before we get started. I do want to, I always like to the Veterans Breakfast Club is a really special thing where we gather members of the public. Anybody could come. All our events are open to the public. Anybody could come in. I love it when non-veterans like me join and listen to the stories. And I want to honor not only Windsong, World War II veteran. I see we have Warren Goss here. Hello, World War II veteran. And I want to point out especially our oldest veteran. Oh, Jack Barrow is on. Hello, Jack. Our oldest veteran, and I hate to do this to you, Julia, but I am going to call you out as our 99-year-old oldest veteran turns 100 years old, first week of March. Julia Parsons, she was a Navy wave in World War II. She did really important work decoding Enigma. And then we have our youngest participant, who is Henry Schepke from Madison, Wisconsin, 13 years old. Hello, Henry. How are you? Thank you for joining us. And think about this. Henry and Julia are separated by 86 years. And yet they both come on this program and enjoy the program together. How many things in our culture can somebody who's 99 and 13 come together and participate and offer such wonderful things to this program? So I want to thank both of them for joining us. And I should let people know that Henry is an autograph collector. He collects World War II veterans autographs, all veterans autographs. And so Windsong, Henry I know he's going to want your autograph, so I'm going to connect you, I hope, to Henry Schepke, and maybe he'll send you something in the mail you could sign and send back to him and be part of his collection. But I thought I would start by I'd introduce Mike Mair. Mike is really the one who got this. Actually, Nick DeVoe in St. Lucia. Hello, Nick, with the Logbook Project. He's the one who got this started. He connected me to Mike, and he said, you might be interested in having Mike on the program. We had a long conversation and much correspondence, and Mike did yeoman service in getting together a huge collection of people, all of whom had a connection to the USS Mississinewa story and Kaiten. Mike, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Can you share with people your father? I'm going to share the screen here and show people your book, but I know that the book, although it's a thorough history of the whole Kaiten project, it was inspired by your father's service. And I want you to share with people the story that you shared with me over the phone about you being a child when you learned about your dad's service.
Well, when I was growing up in the 1950s and 1960s, my father, John, and he also goes by Jack, of course, he never spoke about his Navy service. And this is not unusual. Many veterans came home, pursued education, pursued their life's work, their careers, raised their families, raised their baby boomer children like me to be good citizens, and moved on with their lives. And so I did not know anything about this. When I was about 9 years old, my father did mention one night that he'd been on a ship that had been sunk, but nothing more was said. And when I was 12 years old, I had gone to the local grocery store, and I'd always been interested in the U.S. Navy, especially in the Pacific during World War II. I was always looking at book racks and magazine racks, looking for a story or something that of interest. And I happened to find this particular book in 1966, early 1966, called Suicide Submarine. And this particular book was written by an Army journalist that was in Japan during the occupation, Joseph Harrington. And he interviewed a former Kaiten pilot, Yutaka Yokota. And Yokota explained about the Kaiten program, which was basically unknown. Well, for me, looking at this book, I opened up the rear cover and the Mississinewa was mentioned. So I was extremely excited. I purchased this little paperback, pedaled home on my bike, and waited for my dad to come home from Parker Pen Company, where he worked. I was so excited. I wanted to ask him, tell me everything that happened. And so he came in through the door and sat down in his easy chair, opened up the evening newspaper like he did every day. And he started to read the newspaper, and here's this 12-year-old kid waving this book underneath his nose going, Dad, I found this book. It mentioned your ship. Tell me what happened. Tell me what happened. I want to know. And he took the book from me. He looked at the cover. He looked at the back cover, and he took it and he threw it across our living room and didn't say another word for 29 years.
Oh my. I mean, that must have scared you from ever bringing it up again.
I never did bring it up again. I did not. It was my son, BJ, that broke the ice in 1995, and I think he's with us here today on Zoom. And so that came about when, on Labor Day 1995, we decided to go visit Grandpa Mair at his home. And on the way there, my son, who was at that time the same age as I was, when my father rejected me in regards to telling the story. And BJ said, I'm doing a paper for school about a grandparent, and I'm going to ask Grandpa about his ship that was sunk. And I'll tell you, my heart sank because my worst fear was my son was going to be rejected like I was.
Oh boy.
And instead, what happened is BJ said, Grandpa, I'm writing a paper for school. Can you tell me about your ship that was sunk? It really took Grandpa back. He was very surprised. And he looked at BJ and he said, BJ, I don't think students should be studying about war. There's terrible things that go with it, to loss of life and destruction, lives ruined. He said, I just have tried to put this behind me. And I asked him, why do you feel that way? And I could barely hear his answer because under his breath he said, because I lived through it.
Mm. And that really started you on your journey, and it was a 25-year journey to kind of track what happened to your father's ship, what your father's story was. And it seemed like one of those things, Mike, where you started peeling back the onion and you kept peeling and peeling and peeling. There's more to it until you finally really got to the whole story of Kaiten. And you wrote this wonderful book, and I would just want to say it again, Kaiten, Japan's Secret Man Mission, Suicide Submarine, and the first American ship that sank in World War II. I've been reading it. It is fantastic. I know that Joy Waldron was a co-author.
Yes.
I'm guessing that she was the stylist. You provided the research, and she's a beautiful writer. The research is so interesting and important, and it's just it grips you from the first page. I mean, I think it's absolutely just beautifully done. And what intrigues me is how respectful you are of the Japanese side to this story. And you can see that it was published in Japan. How has your book been received in Japan?
The book has really been well received in Japan. And when I visited Japan last year in November, the Japanese told me, they said, you wrote a very fair and balanced story and truthful. One of the hardest things I had to do was try and earn the trust of the Japanese Kaiten pilot veterans that were still with us in the late 90s, early 2000s. They felt that Western writers had too much bias and had not offered a true representation of the way things really were for them and for others during the war. And so it took about 2-3 years for me to gain the trust of the Japanese. And I realized that I finally had, when I came home from work one day, there was a package in my garage from Japan. And inside that package was a note from Mr. Toshihiro Kanada, the president of Kaiten Kai. And he said, Mike, you're the first American we've trusted with our story since the war. Here are original pictures of us and some of the things that we have done. Please scan them and return them to me in Japan.
Oh my.
That's when I understood that I had finally earned their trust.
You had to earn the Japanese trust, but you also, in a sense, kind of had to earn your father's trust. I mean, here's a picture of your father in the Navy, somebody who was unwilling to talk about his experiences for, decades. And he came around. He did come around.
He did. And what really broke the ice on this was the fact I asked him, can I do a little bit of research? And he said, Mike, I really don't care. I've tried to put this behind me. However, what changed this was I posted a little bit on the internet in 1995. Boy, that was a challenge, learn how to do this little HTML stuff, and posted some bulletin boards all over the internet trying to find any family that was connected. And the first 5 families that contacted me had lost loved ones aboard Mississinewa and been trying for decades to find out from the US government what had happened. And of course, nobody knew.
My ship was just like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. And so
right.
what made the change was they all wanted to talk to my father. And initially he said, no, I can't do it. It's too painful. He's not the only one that feels that way. And yet a couple of months later, he called me up one Sunday afternoon and he said, do you still have the phone numbers of the families that contacted you? And I said, yes, I do. He said, I'm going to call each family. And I asked him, what changed your mind? He said, I've been thinking about it. I didn't know the sailor who died, but I can tell them what happened to me. And I said, Dad, these families are searching for any little bit of closure they can possibly get. Of course, each family thanked him, and that completely turned him around and he started to open up.
Oh my. I mean, if you think about it, I always think of our veterans who do things like that, who reach back to a difficult part of their lives as heroes twice. And I know we have several on our program now. They were heroes in the war, and then they're heroes later in life when they screw up the courage to go back and revisit the trauma.
Yes.
Can I ask, I want you to describe what happened on November 20th, 1944 to the Mississinewa. But we have one person here who is the only person here who is a witness to it, and that's Windsong Blake. And I want to introduce him and spotlight him because his story is so interesting in so many ways. I would hope that he'll, like this experience enough to want to come back. Windsong, I'm going to share a picture of you when you were in the Navy. How old were you here?
17.
You were 7 years old. You grew up in Massachusetts. Was it New Bedford?
Yes. Yeah.
And what made you want to join the Navy?
Well, I was in a house full of kids. I had about 5 other brothers and sisters in right after the Depression, which was very tough during them days. I was doing all kinds of little work all over the place, cutting fish and washing cars and everything, and I had to change diapers and put clothes out on the line and all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to be a man and get out of here, and join the Navy. See, so I went downtown and got a piece of paper, and the guy said, "Well, you're not old enough. Bring it home." And I did, and my father signed it, and off I went. And that was it. But I don't know what was the worst, going in the Navy or staying home.
And I'm so interested in your story for so many reasons, Windsong, but one of them is your heritage, your background. You're Cape Verdean. Cape Verde is Portuguese owned islands off the coast of Africa, I believe. You're also Wampanoag, Native American. And so when you joined the Navy, did you have to, did you join, race? I should remind people it was a segregated Navy. Whites and blacks did not serve together. There was racial discrimination was rampant. Did you serve as white or non-white?
Non-white.
Non-white.
Well, I didn't have a choice. Actually, well, I had a choice, but the choice didn't seem right. I asked the guy said, what nationality are you? And I told him I was Indian and Portuguese, Cape Verdean. And he said, we don't know nothing about that. You're either black or white.
Oh gosh, sorry to laugh, but oh my gosh,
That's it. So
that's it.
I chose the black because I wasn't white. And I don't know, I had some black in me, I guess, way back. But I grew up in a black and Cape Verdean area of New Bedford. And not in the north end of New Bedford was Polish and Irish and all of that. I never went up in that area much. So where I hung around with was mostly black and Cape Verdean Portuguese people. So I figured I better stay in that, stay there. But I was treated awful.
Oh,
Let me tell you, I was treated awful. I went down to Bainbridge, Maryland for boot camp. And there was all white guys that were running the show, you know. And boy, they picked on us, black, supposedly black now. They picked on us like you wouldn't believe. Wake us up in the middle of the night and make us run all around the place with our sea bags on our head. You know, they treated us really bad. And when I went in on the ship, it wasn't much different until I started knowing more people. But it wasn't a very good time because of the treatment. You know, we run around the camp. We went around the camp with wooden rifles. They didn't even trust us with real rifles like the other Navy guys. You know, they didn't trust us. I don't know why, but that was it. So
oh my.
it wasn't that great the whole time in the Navy, you know.
Did it, Windsong, sorry to interrupt you, but did it get any better when you were assigned to a ship?
It got a little better, yeah, because now you know I'm with other people and so forth, and I got to know a few. But like I said, I hardly knew a whole lot of the men on that ship. I knew 2 or 3 of them, and a couple of the black guys were friends of mine. This one guy, yeah, this one guy here, if you can see a picture of him.
Oh yes, sure.
Yeah, he was my buddy, black guy. And Lloyd, his name was Lloyd Bryant. He was on the ship with me. And I tried to get a hold of him later, but I never did, never could. And McCoy, the guy here with his wife, no, the guy with his, yeah, this guy, that guy. And this guy here was a good friend of mine too. Yeah, his name was Rex Lamb. Rex Lamb. And he was down in the laundry room. See, where I used to be bringing clothes and stuff down there, and we'd do a lot of talking. And when I got home, we talked with one another on the phone and sent pictures. I got pictures of his wife and his kids, but he passed away 3 years ago. Oh. And that was that. The poor guy, he ended up with bad lungs and he was on an air oxygen tank and all of that. Yeah.
Windsong, your ship was the USS Muskoma, which was the same kind of ship as the USS Mississinewa, which was an oiler. Can you explain to people what an oiler was?
Yeah, well, we was part of the Fifth Fleet, Admiral Halsey there, and we would get filled up and follow the fleet around, you know, and supply all the ships with oil and gas and a whole lot of other stuff, you know, mail, everything, anything we could carry, and so we followed the Navy around wherever the Fifth Fleet, the fleet. We no matter where they went, we had to supply them with gas and oil, especially the aircraft carriers use a lot of gas you know, for those planes. They were constantly attacking all the little islands down there, Ulithi, Guam, all the Philippines, and all those islands were being attacked all the time. And so there was one ship, I don't know what the name of it was, but he kept worrying about running out of gas all the time. So that guy was up alongside of us every time we went around. You know.
And that, you know, and I have to say, I'll let people should know I'm a historian, and when I would teach a class on World War II, I would often say that the US's biggest advantage in World War II was also its biggest logistical challenge, and that was that the war wasn't being fought here in the lower 48, which meant that all the men, all the equipment, all the weapons had to be, you know, sent to the four corners of the earth. And that, for the Navy, that meant a lot of fuel for a lot of ships. So those oilers, although they weren't, you know, the glamorous battleships or carriers, they were absolutely essential to the war effort. If the oilers weren't there, those ships were not sailing. Simple as that.
Where are they going to go without gas and oil?
Where are they going to go without gas and oil? And
Yeah.
it also made those oilers targets for the Japanese.
Oh,
They
yeah,
knew that if they
targets. They always had a little sub near us, not too far. You could see the sub chaser at a distance, you know, around you when you looked, and you felt good when you seen that destroyer or something around you, you know, just making sure there was no subs too close or something.
Right.
Especially in that storm, you know, that typhoon. You know, the typhoon that took over 700 men, I think. The typhoon, the worst typhoon in naval history. I was in that, and almost got blown into Luzon. We lost power on the ship. That ship, that Mascoma, God bless it though, it kept running. The motor kept running. It stopped running. And we were always floundering around on that, trying to get the motor to get going again. And so they'd leave a little destroyer hanging around until we got it going, and then catch up with the fleet again. But that typhoon was the worst, other than the Mississinewa. That was awful.
Oh, and I want to get you to talk a little bit about the Mississinewa. But first, I want to let people know I'm flying solo today. Usually we have Ellie or Sean Hall helping me here. So I'm a little slow catching up with any of the chats in the Zoom side or on the Facebook side. And I also want to let people know we have a lot of people who have wonderful stories to tell around this USS Mississinewa and Kaiten. If any of you have to go and you want to make sure that you get on, I don't mean go to the bathroom, I mean leave. If any of you have to you could let me know, raise your hands and let me know, and I'll cut in and make sure that you get on. I could already see that we're going to continue this conversation next week on December 20th, 4 p.m. Eastern time. But if nobody else has anything to say, just if you feel like you want to butt in, anybody who has a story to tell, Jim Gleason and John Rulmal and Kathy, please do just speak up, unmute yourself and speak up. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Windsong to do something that might not be easy for him. And that is if he could tell us what he saw on November 20th, 1944 at Ulithi when the USS Mississinewa was attacked.
Well, it started when I was down in the kitchen. We were getting coffee and stuff ready for breakfast. And all of a sudden the ship shook, and I heard the big explosion. And so all of us ran up topside, and there was the Mississinewa blowing up, and all the guys jumping off the ship, and a lot of them were already in the water, and the water was on fire, and there was fire pieces of the fire and stuff coming down even on our ship like rain. And it was so close, and you see the poor men all in the water, and the water was on fire, the oil was on fire, and there were ships all around trying to pick them up. There was even a little plane that came by and landed and picked up a few guys. And we lowered a couple of the boats we had and went down and picked up, I don't know, I think 20 something men that were in the water. We pulled them out, and including Mike's father, we pulled him out. And I was watching all that, and those guys were, boy, we were feeling awful that we couldn't, go down and help them ourselves, yourself. It was terrible, and the smoke was hard to take, and then the submarines, the destroyers. The destroyer escorts were chasing the submarines and dropping their cans of explosives, and the poor guys must have been in shock in the water, listening, hearing those explosions that must have deafened their ears and deafened us up above, and they were all over around dropping them cans of explosion. And I even seen one of the destroyers chase a submarine up on the beach of a small island nearby. I could just about see it, but I seen it. And they chased it and shot at it, and I guess they blew it up or something. I don't know what happened after, but it was a terrible ordeal. We had a hard time with that. A long time after that, looking at the terrible thing.
Oh my. And I want to ask John Rulmal, if you wouldn't mind saying a few words now, because this all happened in Ulithi. And Ulithi is such an important part of what we call the Pacific War in World War II. It was the largest anchorage, I think, in history. 700 ships could fit within a 20-mile by 10-mile horseshoe of a coral reef. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of your land, of your home here, John?
I could try. What particular part of history?
I suppose the war. Yeah, the war. How did World War II change your home?
Oh boy, on so many different levels, obviously. Personally, though, I had personal family tragedies that happened. Hopefully you don't mind my sharing that, but we had my grandmother. There's two casualties in my family that mark big events of the war. So the very first day of invasion, the very first day of air bombing, my grandfather was one of the casualties, and the other on my mom's auntie marked the invasion day. So those two events were marked by those two deaths within my immediate family.
Oh.
How has it changed us? Boy, in so many different ways. Remember, I'm looking at that video and I'm amazed, first of all, by how calm the water in November is at that time. I'm not sure it caught my attention. I'm an ocean person. The whole atoll population of Ulithi was on Federated at that moment. The whole Ulithi was used as the base, and so they put everybody from the atoll on Federated, which is closer to where the Mississinewa still sits now. And so I've heard stories of my mom was 5 years old at that time, and she actually was on the beach. They remembered the big smoke and the black sands that followed this event, and the burning water. It's interesting to hear it from Windsong. Remember, these are natives that haven't really been exposed too much, so the burning water was a big deal to say, wow, it's crazy. Whatever happens on these big monster moving islands, or they were called then, it can burn water. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I could just let people know, just give them a little bit of a background that Ulithi is a coral reef. It
Mhm.
sits just above sea level. And it's about, I think you could correct me if I have this wrong. It seems to be about 20 miles long and 10 miles wide in a horseshoe kind of shape. And at 30 places along that horseshoe, the reef rises above the water level. And so you have these 30 little, you can't even call them islands, they're islets. They're very small. In fact, the largest of the islands is in the picture behind you. That's where you grew up. That's the
Yeah.
largest of the Ulithian islands. And the Japanese took it over, I think, in the beginning of the war. When did the Japanese arrive, John?
I'm not sure exactly what year. Mike would know that.
Okay.
But I knew the stories. Most of them. I'm not a historian, but but I love hearing the sides I hear is really from the grandparents,
Right.
and so they talk about their story on how the Japanese had been there for a while. So mind you, this from their perspective, here's the enemy was they were part of that at that time. So they think of, even though there's horrible stories of experiences under that occupation, but they knew that there was an enemy coming in and it's going to bomb. So they were caught up in the middle of all of this. And boy, I can understand Mike's father, hesitation, because even in our family from the local side, there's really a lot of stories that were just unfinished because they wouldn't continue. And I that just brings back so much memories, Mike, to hear the hesitation to share these things. Some were painful and were taken with him, but
Yeah.
I think it devastated everybody in so many different levels. Yeah.
In 1944, the U.S. Navy ran across Ulithi and discovered that within that horseshoe was a wonderful anchorage, 100 feet deep, where you could fit hundreds and hundreds of ships, and it became the largest anchorage of the Pacific, and the staging point for the invasion of the Philippines and a lot of other operations in the Pacific. I want to share just some wonderful photos that Mike Mair shared with me. Mike, do you have more to add to our conversation here about Ulithi and the remarkable role it played in the war?
Yes. I had the privilege, before I comment on the photographs you're showing here, I had the privilege of having a meal with John's mother. And John's mother explained what told me about, that day that the U.S. carrier airplanes came over in September 1944. And, sadly, her father, John's grandfather, was in a canoe taking copra from a copra plant, dried coconut meat, out to a small Japanese freighter, and he was hit by a round from a United States airplane. The other thing is that John's mother told me that when the Japanese soldiers came up, on shore and informed the tribal leaders that Ulithi is now the property of Japan. She said that concept just did not make any sense to the tribal leaders. These have been their islands and their reefs for generations and generations. And the concept that somebody else would come in and say, this is now our land, our property, was inconceivable. There's a really good photo you've got that shows how many ships are actually in the lagoon, which would be nice to show, because you could put hundreds of ships in this sheltered anchorage. And because it was so large, the average depth is 140 feet. And a lot of the veterans that I've worked with, hundreds of them over the years, have said you could walk from one end of the lagoon to the other, not get your feet wet.
Right.
And you have to remember that because the islands were so small, you had everything logistically had to be floating. So, for example, for fuel, as Windsong shared with us, merchant tankers would come from the United States, from the West Coast, from Aruba, and they would come to Ulithi, offload onto what they called station tankers. These were old, obsolete tankers that couldn't move with the fleet, or they were just anchored at Ulithi. They were fuel depots, storage units, and then they would then offload fuel then to the modern fast Navy oilers. This is the island of Mogmog, although John, in your language, what's the proper pronunciation? Is it Mumu?
Momo.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
And so in John's language, it's Momo. This was the Fleet Recreation Center, which, as Windsong said, was little more than a sand spit with a makeshift baseball diamond. And that's where the sailors could get off their vessels and have a couple cans of warm beer. Here's a pier from Mogmog, as we pronounce it in the US. And the sailors, offloading off a small craft to get a little time on the beach. My father was scheduled to get his very first liberty on the beach the day they got hit. As he used to say, I got off the ship before I wanted to.
Oh, gosh. Oh, boy. How many were killed on the Mississinewa?
63 sailors died on Mississinewa. And I need to ask Ron Fullerman here. Ron just recently did a count on the number of wounded aboard ship. If Ron could chime in here.
Yeah, Ron, please do chime in. I'll introduce you. This is Ron Fullerman, who is the author of another book on Kaiten. It's I guess, a young adult historical fiction. And your father, Ron, was a Mississinewa survivor?
Yes. He worked in the fire rooms. He was a water tender second class. Mike, you caught me off guard. I've forgotten how many I just added up.
It was quite a few, Ron. I think most of the ship's complement, except for perhaps maybe about 50 sailors out of 278 were burned or injured. Some man, those that didn't lose their lives.
Yes, bouncing in my head was about 198 of them.
And this is Ron's book, Faces in the Flames, a ghost story. And Ron, if you would put where people could get the book, if they want to buy a copy, read a copy, in the chat here on the Zoom side, we'll transfer it on to the Facebook Live side. And we also want to make the Kaiten book, Mike, your book, available to people if they want to buy it on, from a online bookstore. Mike, you also very kindly sent me 3 copies, which we're going to give away. And it would be a great Christmas gift because it really is a wonderful read. Ron, did your father, here's a picture of your father, did he ever talk about it?
Oh, yes. Yeah. He had served a year before. He had served for a year on the light cruiser Mobile. And they were constantly drilling, going through the drills. He said it got to the point where the chiefs in the fire rooms told the captain that they couldn't be they wouldn't be held responsible for the readiness for the fire room guys because they were just exhausted. So he had a lot of experience with that. And then, so when he got onto the Mississinewa, he said it was he was surprised how calm he was when it all went down. He had a kind of interesting story. Can I share it briefly?
Sure, please do. Yeah.
Like so many of the guys, he slept up on deck because of the heat. Ulithi there, and in the berthing sections there, it was pretty hot. So anyway, even though he was used to the hot heat of the fire rooms where the boilers are, he said he went upstairs or went down to his bunk area there. He was going to change because it happened at 5:45 in the morning. He was getting ready for their shift started 6 a.m. And he said the explosion hit, so he ran down to the fire room to build up the steam because they had a steam smothering system on board the ship. And so he told me that there was Red Foster. He was down there, and another guy named Bo Chow. They were on watch there, but he was like right outside the door of the fire rooms when it hit. So he just walked in, went to actually start up some of the boilers. Then the chief, Smitty, Edmund Smith, came down, and they were trying to build up pressure on the boilers. And my dad went back up to the next level up, which overlooks the fire room there, working on the water feed for the boilers. As he was working on that, somewhere in that whole process, he said Bo Chow was sent out to see what was going on. They were worried about getting caught down in the fire room when it was sinking, if it was going to be sinking. They thought it was just an explosion by an accident up forward. So, but as they were working, a fellow came, stuck his head in the fire room hatch there, and said, the captain just came by, said, "Get off the ship, it's going down." So we called down the other guys down below, and they were shutting down all the boilers except for one they left on auxiliary, and because they weren't really sure if they're going to have to get off, they were going to lose the ship, or if they'd able to get back to it. Anyway, so they tried to go out on the starboard side, but at that time the flames and smoke were really coming in heavy on that starboard side. So they actually went up a level to the chief's level, and that's on the port side, and they went out that port side hatch. And as they were walking out into the corridor there, Smitty, the chief, said, "What happened to Bo Chow? Anybody see Bo Chow get out?" And neither he nor Red Foster had seen or had kept track of Bo Chow. So Smitty said, "Fullerman, go make sure Bo Chow got out." So Smitty and Red went aft down the hallway, and somewhere my dad went over to the hatch. Said he looked in, but such heavy smoke was coming out. He said if Bo Chow was there, he would have been dead. So as he's turning around, the corridor is filling up with smoke, and he heard somebody yell, "You can't go aft because the ammunition's going off." And he thought to himself, "Oh, Jesus, my mom's going to get a telegram."
Yeah.
And so then he looked over and saw out of the corner of his eye, some guy in the skivvies up forward more ran out down the corridor. And I thought, if that guy can make it, maybe I can too. So he followed him out that way, went down eventually to the well deck, where he was about 4 feet off the water. The flames had not closed in at that point. He said that he had been there probably about 15 minutes or so before they left the ship, but he said the flames, because of the way the wind was blowing the smoke and the flames, there was still an opening there on the side of the ship on that port side. So he swam out that way and swam out to boats that were waiting there for picking up guys.
Boy, these photos just capture the kind of extent of the damage and the catastrophe. Oh boy. Did anybody know? I'll ask you, Ron, first, and then turn to Mike again, because I want to get to the Kaiten, these suicide torpedoes. Did anybody know at the time that these were the Kaiten?
No, actually, my dad always said it was two-man subs that they thought it was. Even, he told me I don't know, I guess I was about 9 years old or so, or 8 or 9. He was telling me about how they were hit by these two-man subs. And even in Bill Dennehy's reunion for the Mississinewa that took place in '89, I believe it was, Bill Dennehy, I remember the video, they were talking about two-man subs attacking their ship. So they didn't know. It wasn't really addressed, other than, that they were attacked. And I think it was probably just left that most everybody was familiar with the two-man sub, so they just assumed it was two-man subs.
Mike Mair, can you tell us a little bit about the Kaiten program and why the Japanese started it, when they started it, and what kind of just a little bit about the background to this program?
Yes, in actually early 1943, two young sailor officers, Hiroshi Kuruki and Seikyo Nishina, both went to upper command, and they had the concept of taking a Type 93 torpedo propulsion system, and that's Seikyo Nishina that you're seeing there on your left. He was the one that sank Mississinewa. We did manage to prove that.
Yeah.
And so what happened is that they had decided that they could take the propulsion system from the highly effective Type 93 torpedo, lengthen out the body. So there was a tiny cabin midships that could house one Kaiten pilot. They were called pilots because at that time there was very little fuel in Japan. So a lot of the young officers that volunteered for the Kaiten program were actually aviation trainees. And so that's why they call them pilots. And so once they lengthened this out, they attached a warhead that was 3,418 pounds of high explosive. Now, for those of you that don't know much about torpedoes, a typical torpedo would have 500 or 600 pounds of high explosive. And often it would take certainly, 2 or 3 torpedoes sometimes to sink a major capital ship. Well, the Japanese felt with this much explosive firepower that the Kaiten could break the back of an aircraft carrier or a battleship. I remember scuba diving through that huge hole in the hull of the Mississinewa, and the power of this weapon was unbelievable. You can see the man in the center of the drawing there. Fuel was so short that in Tokuyama Bay, when they trained, they would actually fit 2 young pilot officers into one Kaiten to train in the bay because fuel was so short that what they called wet training, the ability to navigate the manned torpedo, they had to take every advantage. The young Kaiten pilots said you had to have 6 or 7 hands to operate this device because you had to maintain your buoyancy. The attack plan was you had to maintain 15 feet underneath the surface of the water. You had a tiny stubby periscope that you cranked up with a gear and cable that you would crank up to try and get a bearing on your target. And once you got a final bearing on your target, this particular manned torpedo could do 30 knots at full speed, about 75 feet per second underneath the water. There was no avoiding it. A ship would not have the ability to avoid this particular weapon. And so this particular weapon, even in the 1990s, early 2000s, just simply was not known in Japan. This was kept secret for a very long time.
The larger context of Kaiten was the same context that inspired the kamikaze. And that was that by the summer of 1944, Japan was losing the war. And it was very clear that Japan would never be able to experience anything like victory in this war. They were losing battle after battle. Their best pilots were dead. They were losing battles at sea, in the air. Their industrial capacity was becoming crippled, and the industrial capacity was never even close to what the U.S. industrial capacity was to begin with. And so the only hope really was to, I guess the word is to frighten or intimidate or stave off the final cataclysmic showdown and the invasion of Japan itself by demonstrating that the Japanese were willing to, give everything to hurt the American progress toward the home islands. And it's really kind of a last-ditch effort to force the United States to sue for peace for something less than unconditional surrender. And so Kaiten was part of that larger context. I know, Mike, there were many different models or types of Kaiten. Only one type, I guess type 1 was the only one that was actually deployed in war. And so these were affixed to the the top of submarines, specially fitted submarines, and then they would be launched from the submarine underwater.
Yes, that is correct. I also would like to point out that the Kaiten pilots differed somewhat substantially from kamikaze aircraft pilots. They were volunteers. The majority of them were well-educated young officers, graduates of the Imperial Japanese Naval Academy at Tajima. And so they were actually volunteers. And In the case of some of the kamikaze pilots, they could barely take off or land, and often couldn't even land an airplane. But the Kaiten pilots were the cream of the crop. To be selected, you had to be the very best of the best in the Imperial Japanese Navy to participate in that particular program. And Todd, I just lost my train of thought. Your question was?
I guess, let's see, what was my question? Here, I have a new question. I can't remember my old question, Mike, but I have a new one. And it's something that you just brought up. One thing that I love about your book, and I love about your approach, was how seriously and respectfully you take the Japanese position.
Yes.
That doesn't always happen, as you know, in histories, but I think it's so important that we understand the enemy and understand where they're coming from. Can you help explain to people why anybody would volunteer to be a Kaiten, a suicide submariner?
I'll actually tell you from the Kaiten pilot's own words, the way they explained it to me. They knew the war was lost. By the time they started training in September 1944 and Kure Naval Base started to turn out the Type 1 Kaitens, the first type, the only type ever used in combat, they realized the war had been lost. They knew their military leaders were not going to give in. Each one of them felt that by giving their life and hopefully sinking a capital American warship, they felt that even America, with all her industrial might, could hardly afford to lose 50 or 100 major capital warships, and perhaps they might be able to sue for peace. And there was a very personal side of this as well. They knew that the military government of Japan would force their families, their brothers, their sisters, and their parents to defend the beaches of an Allied invasion of Japan. They knew it was going to be bad, and they felt that they valued life as much as anybody else does. But they felt if they would give their life, perhaps their families would be spared and their country would be spared.
I'm going to walk through some photos from the Kaiten program. And if you want to stop me and explain what we're looking at, that would be wonderful.
This is Admiral Miwa. He is actually addressing the Kaiten pilots on the very first sortie. The mission to Ulithi was called Kikasui. Kikasui is a Japanese term for floating chrysanthemum. And the Kikasui mission was the very first mission at the Kaiten Memorial Museum in Japan. And it is a substantial part of the museum there in Japan. He's offering a speech addressing the young Kaiten pilot officers there.
Oh, boy. And I love the little detail in your book that the first request to create the Kaiten program came to Admiral Yamamoto himself.
Yes.
In a document written in blood.
Yes. Yes. Hiroshi Kuroki wrote that document on fine rice paper in his own blood as a show of sincerity. This particular drawing was given to the commander of the Kaiten pilots, Sub-Lieutenant Sekio Nishina, the night before he was launched to attack Ulithi along with his comrades aboard I-47. This was a pencil drawing, and it shows an aircraft carrier blowing up in the center, and Chief Oka of the submarine I-47 presented that as a gift to Nishina, and Nishina penciled on it Goshan, which means instantly sunk.
Mm.
The Japanese did develop light cruisers and 2 or 3 different ships to be able to launch Kaiten from ships. They were never used in combat because the anti-submarine and the overwhelming ability of the Allied forces prevented them from venturing out with ships. They had to carry Kaiten strapped to the decks of large fleet I-class submarines and then transport them to the target area. And the initial concept was to attack anchorages such as Ulithi. However, by January 1945, and security had increased in anchorages around the Pacific, the Japanese resorted to Kaiten being launched in the open sea, and that weapon was never designed for that.
Mhm.
Seikyo Nishina on the left, Lieutenant Kemabupu on the right. He was aboard I-37, and that was a diversionary submarine out of the 3 launched at Ulithi. They were launched on I-37 to attack Coastal Passage at Palau as a diversionary attack the day before Ulithi was attacked. However, they were discovered, and the USS Conklin, a destroyer escort, actually dropped depth charges. I interviewed sailors aboard that particular ship that described the catastrophic explosion and a mushroom of water that rose higher in the air, higher than anybody had ever seen. But that was the combined explosive of all of the Kaiten that were on the decks of that I-37. This is a Kaiten pilot just before that, I believe, the Taman mission, receiving a short sword, ceremonial sword, and they were also given sake. On his head is a hachimaki, and a hachimaki was a headband that they wore into battle, often signed by young schoolgirls or friends, family, and so on. They wore those into battle as well. This is the crew. I believe this is the. Do you have the next picture, Todd? Just so
Let's
I can
see.
help. Okay, yeah, this is these are the 4 Kaiten pilots that boarded I-47, commanded by Captain Zenchi Arita, one of the more experienced submarine commanders. They boarded I-47 on November 9th, 1944, and sailed for Ulithi on the Kikasui inaugural mission. Seikyo Nishina here is actually in the very center of this photograph. He is saluting Admiral Miwa just as I-47 is getting ready to depart Kure Naval Base with their Kaiten aboard.
Mm.
This particular Kaiten blew up on a reef at Ulithi in the southwest portion of the anchorage. It was discovered in January 1945, early in January. In my book, I did outline that the mission had gone horribly wrong, and the Japanese did not realize that until all the research that I did with them. But 2 Kaiten stranded on a reef and blew up, and the U.S. did recover the remains of one Type 1 Kaiten, and this is what allowed them to realize that Japan had developed a new weapon.
So this was it. This was the evidence that gave them
Yes.
insight into the program.
Although the sailors were not told, the Mississinewa survivors, none of them knew how their ship had been sunk until Ron Fullman and I organized the 1999 reunion along with Sarah Bright for the survivors, and they were astounded to learn that they had been the victims of a secret weapon nobody knew about.
Mm.
Here are 2 Kaiten strapped to the decks of an I-class submarine. There were 4 bands that held the Kaiten man torpedoes in place on the deck. Now, the Japanese had developed a canvas tube, and they had a so-called escape hatch on the bottom of the Kaiten that was placed there to please the upper command in Japan, that the pilot could eject and escape, so it wouldn't be a toko suicide weapon. But if they would have attempted to do that, the explosion of this powerful weapon would have killed them anyway. So it was instead used on Kaiten that were built after November 1944 as a way to enter the Kaiten from inside the submarine. On this mission, the Kikasui mission, most of the Kaiten had to be entered on the deck. That means the submarine had to surface, extremely dangerous with anti-submarine forces by the US, had to surface and put their Kaiten pilots into the weapons and then seal the hatch.
So these hatches were sealed. There was no getting out once you went in.
That is correct. There was no getting out. 2 of the 4 bands would be released on deck, and then 2 had the ability to be released inside the submarine to launch them.
Boy, oh boy.
There you can see the Kaiten pilots as they leave on a mission. You know, they wave their caps. You can see the propulsion system there and the screws on the rear of the Kaiten. 48 feet long, 3 feet in diameter, with that 1.5 tons of explosive in the warhead.
Oh boy, oh boy. More Kaiten.
Yes. That's the remains of the Kaiten that you saw in the previous picture in the ocean. And it was brought to Azor Island by the Seabees. Actually had put it on a crane. And I have a friend of mine, John from New York City, that whose father was in that CB battalion at Ulithi, and he told me that he said for a while they actually placed this thing on 2 posts, and it was like the gateway entry to their base, which I've never seen a picture of in that regard. However, I don't know what ever happened to this particular remnant of a Kaiten. The pilot's cabin's gone. You just see the stern propulsion. This was the ceremony at their secret base on Ashizima Island just before they left for the Kikasui mission. This photograph was provided to me by the Japanese.
Boy, oh boy.
That's the same ceremony. Many of the photographs in the Kaiten book have never been seen in the West.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of part of the wonderful story of the book, is that you get, again, the Japanese side, which is so fascinating. And I want to let people know there's a lot more to this story that I want to cover. I want to go back to John from Ulithi. I want to talk to, we have some sons and daughters of people who were killed on the USS Mississinewa, and sons and daughters of survivors also. And also we should let people know that a lot of the people here went to Ulithi and went diving, and they found the Mississinewa, which is remarkable. And the Mississinewa, having all that petroleum on board, was an environmental hazard, and there's a whole story behind that. And I want to get to that, but I do want to take a little bit of I guess you would call it a commercial break, because, you know, in our programs, we love to have people come and let people know what's going on, opportunities, you know, resources, services available to veterans. And I know we have Valerie with us, who is a part of a big band. Valerie, you've been waiting so patiently. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I know you're part of a big band that is going to do a virtual concert.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm just loving the story. Thank you so much. I'm learning so much. This is just wonderful what you do. And I'm thinking of my father-in-law, because my husband's dad was stationed in Guam and flew missions over Tokyo. He wasn't in the Navy, but I was a pilot, did 16 missions. So I just wonder if he came across any of, because it seemed like it was in the general area. So yeah, just it really personalizes everything so much.
Yes.
But yes, I belong to, I'm from Greensburg, Pennsylvania. The band is out of Jeanette, which is just a little town about 10 minutes from where I live, and we're near Pittsburgh, PA. So of course that's how I found your organization. And we are an 18-piece big band, and we do all the music from the 30s and 40s. And actually, we're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to disabilities awareness, because the gals that founded the group actually have muscular dystrophy, and they're musicians over the years and had a lot of help to them. And so this is their way of giving back to the community, is through this band. So we do a lot of programs for people with disabilities alongside our live band. But also part of our mission is keeping the swing era alive. And we always like to honor our vets whenever we can. So in honor of the end of the the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, we wanted to do a little tribute at our concert upcoming. And I think you're going to help us get some videos together with some little 2-minute stories. We're going to allow maybe about 10 minutes of stories. And we have a piece that we play called the Patriotic Medley that honors all the branches of the service. But this is happening from the Palace Theater out of Greensburg. Next Monday, the 21st at 7 p.m. or 7:30, I'm sorry, 7:30 to 9. And I believe if you just go on to palacetheater.org, you do have to make a donation of at least $10 in order to register for the program. It's either 10, 25, or 50. It's per household. But all those donations go to our band, and a bit of it goes to the Palace Theater for their helping us advertise and put on the program. But we would also want to, of course, maybe have you do something pre-recorded and come on and talk about your organization during our program as well, so that we could promote your program. So
thank you so much, Valerie. I appreciate that, and I'm going to announce this tomorrow at our happy hour, and also a Wednesday morning our program. If you can make it wonderful. I understand you probably have a board meeting tomorrow night, maybe.
Yes, but I'm going to hop on to your program before I go to my board meeting.
Okay, great. So then again, that's Monday night, December 21st at 7:30 p.m. If you want to put a link here on the Zoom side where people can go to register for it, I could then transfer it over to the Facebook side.
Okay, I might have to get back to you on that. I'm going to try and get
okay
from my fellow people, and so I get to the right things. So okay.
All right.
Thank you so much, and this is just wonderful what you're doing, and I really appreciate the. I'm a music therapist, so I work with. I work in hospice, and actually a lot of times I get a chance to work with veterans, and I love hearing their stories when they're willing to share. So it's yeah.
Oh, it's absolutely. I'm with you, because it's absolutely wonderful hearing these stories. I want to, now that we're on the little commercial break, let people know that one of the things that the Veterans Breakfast Club does is we have a video cast and a podcast called The Scuttlebutt, Understanding Military Culture, where ignoramuses like me, who didn't serve in the military, get to ask questions of veterans to help them explain military culture a bit more. And our latest episode, which was released last week, is on the Coast Guard, Jimmy Jones. You'll be interested in that. I don't know if you've, and Dale Gower, I hope you watched it. And where they cover the, questions about what makes the Coast Guard different. And here's an example of the video cast. You could watch it, access all of this programming from veteransbreakfastclub.org. Here's the YouTube version of the Scuttlebutt. And then we also have our happy hour that's tomorrow night at 7 p.m. If you want to join us, we'll be having 4 chaplains, 3 Air Force, 1 Navy, join us to talk about their work, the important work they do supporting servicemen and women in war. And then on Wednesday morning, we have our virtual breakfast. We do not simulcast this. This is a kind of more informal conversation that we have. It's always wonderful. I hope you join us. That'll be Wednesday, December 16th at 9 a.m. But let's get back to this fascinating subject. And again, we're going to continue it a week from today. I was wondering if maybe Jan or Kathy or someone else wants to, or Roland Cook. Well, let's go to you, Jan Rowe Tracy. Your father was killed on the USS Mississinewa. I'm going to ask you to unmute so that we could hear you.
Okay.
There we go. How are you? How are you, Jan? Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Actually, my father was badly injured and died almost 2 weeks later. He was very badly burned. His cabin, I believe, and Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, was very near where the torpedo hit, and the flames came through the porthole. And he did manage to get out and finally was able to get himself off the ship, was rescued and eventually sent to a hospital ship where he died.
He died aboard the hospital ship, and here's a picture of him. So you're a Gold Star daughter. How old were you?
I was 7.
You were 7 years old.
Yes, and never really knew anything. I do remember the day my mother told me what happened, told me that he had died. We went next door to some playmates of mine and their mother, and she told me there. And I just remember screaming and running from one end of the house to the other. But interestingly enough, my mother did eventually remarry. She never talked about my dad. I really didn't know anything about him. And my mother ended up having a stroke, a very debilitating one, and was in a nursing home. And one day when I went to visit her, this elderly gentleman, whom I found out himself had had a stroke, came out of her room and he said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "I understand your father died from a stroke." And I said, "No, that was my stepfather, actually. My dad was a World War II casualty." And he, to make a long story short, asked me what branch of the service he was in and if he was on a ship. And I said, yes, he was. I knew the name of it, the Mississinewa. And he said, my brother-in-law was on that ship.
Oh.
And I was like, my goodness, do you think I could talk to him? You know, would he be willing to speak to me? And he said, well, I will check with him first. And if it's all right with him, I will get you his phone number. And so he did talk to me. He happened to work in another area of the ship. He didn't know my dad, but he said to me, there's the son of one of the crewmen who is writing a book about the story. And he gave me his name and his phone number. And I immediately called him. And Mike said, I know who you are. Your father was the ship's navigator. I never knew that. I didn't know what he did.
And not only that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jan, but not only that, but Mike told me that your father was the most beloved officer on that ship.
Well, Mike has told me that too. And here I am, 83 years old, and having a little difficulty controlling my emotions, but I had missed the first reunion, but subsequently they had another one in 2003, and I was able to go. And I don't know whether it was Ron or his brother who did the newsletter online, but put in a blurb in there that I would like to hear from anybody that remembered my dad. And I got a message on my machine one day in a very New York accent that said, I knew your father. I was on the ship. I was on the Mississinewa, but he never gave me his name. And my husband and I were in the hospitality room at the reunion where Mike and Ron and his brother had set up displays of all the materials that he had. And my husband said to me, Jan, there were people behind us. He said, Jan, that's the man who called on the telephone. Well, it turned out to be Fred Cuevas, who was the cook or one of the cooks on the ship, and he remembered my dad. Mm. And that was just the beginning of some other, I met a couple of other men who remembered him and told me stories. And
you know, before we went live on Facebook at 4 p.m. here Eastern time, all of you were admitted and we were talking here, and it was like a family reunion. You got the sense of a family reunion. And that's, I've run across so often in the veterans community where even the families of people who served in units kind of become cousins or brothers and sisters. I'm sharing right now the awful telegram that your mother received. Yes. The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your husband, Lieutenant Robert Lyford Rowe, USNR, died of wounds following action while in the service of his country. Oh boy. And then there's a wonderful picture of you.
Yes.
Mike, can you tell us a little bit about Robert Rowe?
Yes, as I began to find more and more survivors, thankfully to Ron Fullman, Ron pitched in and put a tremendous amount of effort in to try and find survivors as I was researching. And repeatedly, especially the younger enlisted sailors, the deck force, the young kids that didn't graduate from high school, they went in the Navy at 17 years old, 16 years old, 18 years old. It was the custom in World War II that officers typically did not associate with enlisted sailors.
Right.
Jan's father was exactly the opposite. He was considered the father figure to these young kids, these young boys aboard ship, so far away from home. And he genuinely had a deep concern for their welfare and how they were getting along. He would talk to the youngsters all the time. There was one incident where the USS Mississinewa was refueling the battleship New Jersey with Admiral Halsey aboard the New Jersey, his flagship. The sun had gone down. It was terrible, rough seas. And every time the bow came down in New Jersey, it would send a wave of water over the bow of the Mississinewa. And there were young kids down there on the deck trying to get the lines over and the operating winches. And I remember talking to two fellows on the bridge that said, Lieutenant Rowe put on a raincoat and grabbed a flashlight and started to leave the bridge. The other officer said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "I don't want one of those kids down there to catch an arm or a hand in a winch head." He said, "I'm going down with a flashlight and I'm going to take care of those kids."
Oh boy.
He was the most beloved officer aboard ship. And I can't think of hardly any of the survivors that did not mention Jan's father.
Oh boy. You know, you talk about refueling, and I'm looking at the clock and I see we have 5 minutes left in this program. And I just want to do three things actually before we stop. I want to show people some images of, okay, Windsong. Yes, I see you're waving your hand. Hold on a second here. Hold on. Windsong, are you trying to get my attention? Can you unmute yourself? Okay, once you unmute yourself, speak. Oh, there you go. Hi, Windsong. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, but I gotta leave now. I can't stay much any longer.
Okay.
If you got something you wanted to say, I'll say it, and then I'll be gone.
Okay. Well, one thing I want to say to you is thank you so much for joining us. It's been an honor just to spend some time with you. I hope you could come back next week and share a little bit more of your story.
I don't know. Yeah. I go from day to day.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll
one day at a time. But I want to say to Kathy that was on there. Thank you for your emails and everything, Kathy.
Thank you, Windsong.
Yeah. Thank you very much for all the emails and things you back and forth.
Well, after my dad passed away, you're my closest connection, and so thank you so much for being there for me.
Okay, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Windsong.
Thank you, Windsong, and I hope to see you again, and I hope to see you even next week. And that's one of the three things I wanted to do. It turns out I'm going to do two of these things. I want to invite everybody who's here with us back next week at 4 p.m. If you could make it, Mike, I'm really going to twist your arm. John Rulmal, I know that means getting up really early on Guam to join us. You know, you're going to have to join us the next day. It's Monday in Guam. It's Sunday here. So I do want to invite everybody, and I know I've left people hanging. Roland, I know you have information to share, and Judd and Jim Gleason, Nick DeVoe. I know we want to get you caught up on what you've been doing with the logbook project. I'm sure we have plenty of people here with a lot of questions for everyone. I'd love to continue this conversation. So I will be in contact for those of you whose information I have to invite you back next week, Sunday, December 20th at 4 p.m. to continue this conversation and hear more of your stories. And the final thing I want to do, just in case John Rulmal from Ulithi can't join us, John, you are involved in a wonderful and important project. Mike told me a little bit about you. I know that you went to the University of Hawaii. It's common for somebody to leave Ulithi and never come back, because after all, it's a community of 1,000 people spread out over 30 islands. And but you came back because you feel like you have important work to do on behalf of your home. And I want to share your website and your organization. Could you talk a little bit about it?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is, I do, for those of you that love the ocean, I do work with communities, ocean conservation and reefs. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share this. I didn't know that was coming. This was a very, very informative session. Thank you. I hope to come back next week too, Todd. But this is the work that we do, One People, One Reef. We conserve, we've seen, I'm fumbling here. We work with communities throughout the entire outer island chain to bring attention to the declining reefs and fish population. And we collaborate with science, and we put together science and tradition. It's been fascinating to see the young people really step up and learn about the importance of traditional management, which has been quite fun for me to be able to match up all these indigenous wisdom with modern science. And that's been kind of the cool wow moment for me for the past 7 to 10 years. Meeting lots of people and enjoying the ride. So hopefully when you have time, check us out. We are trying to update all the information we're doing. I miss the water. I'm here in Guam, stuck, should be swimming right now, but with COVID, like all of you, we're all stuck. And so we're looking at the screensavers of ocean instead. So I'm sorry, I wasn't really prepared to talk about my work, but
that's
you bringing attention to it.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, John. I just thought it's so interesting, the work that you do, and so important, the work that you do. And I should let people know that the Micronesia, the Federated States of Micronesia, has been closed to anybody coming in since January or February. So you were out of country when COVID hit, and you've not been able to return. And so
absolutely,
that's a heartbreaking situation for everybody. And I hope that you'll be able to return to Ulithi soon. And I want to let people also know that, I mean, Ulithi is its own language, own culture, and only a few thousand people in the world speak the language and practice the culture. And so we're really honored to have you join us, John. Thank you so much. And I'm grateful to Mike Mair for putting you in contact with us. Let's go a few more minutes, just because we haven't had a chance to have questions here from the group. We'll go a little bit long today, if you don't mind. Does anybody here have questions for our esteemed guest this afternoon?
Todd, I have a question.
Yes.
Hi. I was looking on Wikipedia. Was the ship built at Sparrows Point in Baltimore?
Yes. Yes. At Bethlehem Seal. Oh, wow.
I mean, right there. I had it just in case it wasn't true, because Wikipedia is not always 100%.
Mary
awesome.
is a little bit chauvinistic for Baltimore, but that's okay. We Pittsburghers, we can handle it.
Hey, I love your town, man. I'm a blue collar girl all the way. I love Pittsburgh.
John Ferguson, you had a question, then Dan Vaughn.
One quick question for Mike. How much room does the pilot have in that underwater bomb, if you can call it that?
Yeah.
It was only 3 feet in diameter. And so if you can imagine how cramped and claustrophobic that was, and they would put 2 sailors inside of that to train. And the only air that they had was the air in that manned torpedo. It was a one-way mission.
Wow.
And Barbara Spaventa asks, how many people were on board? I believe you're talking about the oiler, the Mississinewa. It would have been a crew of what, about 250 men?
278.
278 on an oiler. Dan Vaughn.
Yeah, I just had a question in regards to Windsong. I I'm wondering how the Native American Indian, when they were born, actually got their name. Was it because of someone looking outside and seeing something for the first time, and that's how they got their name? How did they actually get their name?
Well, if Windsong joins us again next week, he could let you know. He left this meeting, unfortunately.
I'm just curious, that's all.
Yeah, it's a great story. And there's a lot of cultures have traditions of changing names as you go through life. And I know many Native American groups had that tradition. And it was very challenging for Europeans to keep track of people because they were changing their names several times during their lifetimes. And then when you throw in, oh my gosh, and you don't want the historian in me to come out, you throw in that you have matrilineal societies. And so, the Seminoles, for example, would refer to a father, and that meant their mother's brother. It was very confusing. So, and it's very confusing for historians like me who are trying to do research. So, do we have any other questions out here?
One last question. What was the name of the Japanese pilot who sunk the ship? Because I wanted to look him up and spell it. What was that again?
Seikyo Nishina. Last name is spelled Nishina.
Okay, thank you.
Mike Mair, what? Oh, yes. Hey, yeah, Roland Cook.
Just a quickie. I haven't seen friend John Rulmal since 2006, I think it was. I just want to say how wonderful it is to see you again. And Jan, Jan for, many years as well, and wonderful to see her again. It's just really great way to get back in connection. I'm trying to figure out how we can do this again. John, it's wonderful seeing you guys.
Next week. I'll be back. I'll be back next week. If you would have me.
Nick DeVoe from St. Lucia. Oh, we can't hear you, Nick. I don't know what's going on.
Any better?
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Great. Wow, what a show. What an amazing afternoon. Two things very quickly, and I don't know if you have time to go into it now, but how and where was the sub launched in relation to all those ships in that safe anchorage, and why was that? I can never pronounce the name of the ship, but why was that chosen as the target? Mike, maybe if you could speak to that.
Wonderful question. I should have asked that, Nick. Yeah, why was the Mississinewa, and I practiced pronouncing it before the program, why was the Mississinewa targeted?
The only explanation I can come up with, first of all, the I-class submarines were within about 4 miles of the southern entrance to the lagoon. And as far as Mississinewa, I think Seikyo Nishina, once he got in through the reef, I showed Windsong with a map of the harbor chart exactly what the attack path was. And once he got in there, I think the Mississinewa was the closest vessel because the alert had gone out. They had sunk a Kaiten outside the harbor entrance. And so I think he picked the ship that was sitting lowest in the water, that was fully loaded, and that was Mississinewa, and that determined his target.
Mike, was it true that the Mississinewa actually was not supposed to be anchored in that spot, that it was someone else's, another ship's spot?
Well, yeah, technically, apparently there was a little bit of a dispute with the harbor master when they came in as far as where their berth was supposed to be, and they ended up in that particular location, Jan.
Unfortunately.
Can you believe the expertise that Mike Mair has about this episode? It just blows me away. Somebody asked Rick Arisman asked on the Facebook side, what is Kathy McLeod's connection to all this? I believe, Kathy, did your father serve aboard the USS Muskoma with Windsong?
Yes, he did. And just like a lot or most all World War II vets, I didn't hear a lot about the war. I heard a lot about the Pollywog shellback initiation, about the royal baby, about the typhoon, and riding out the 80-foot waves. And when I was growing up, it was hard. He was an Irishman, and his stories were always so colorful.
Yeah.
And so when I was growing up, it it was hard to tell fact from fiction. And so, as I mentioned, after he passed away, actually he lived on a boat most all his life in a 48-foot Stevens, I believe, in the at Terminal Island in the Navy shipyard there. So I had a chance to sail with him, and he turned me into his little Navy girl. He taught me how to make the knots and how to dock the boats and all about latitude and longitude. And he put me behind the wheel at age 14, and we sailed away. So I think the Navy never left my dad, and he never left the Navy, and it kind of transferred to me somehow. But after he passed away, he was my last immediate family member. And someone like you, Mike, I missed him so much, and there were so many missing pieces. And when I just delved into research, and a lot of that was the Mescoma. And when I did do my research, I came across a page with some of the crewmates. And Windsong, his first name is, I think, Alden Blake. So he was at the top of the list, and there was his email. And so I contacted him thinking, oh my gosh, I can actually maybe contact one of my dad's crewmates of the Mescoma. And sure enough, he got back to me right away. And it set off a wonderful email friendship. We've shared so many nice stories, photos. The first question I asked was about the typhoon and the 80-foot waves. He said, oh yes, that was true. Your dad was telling you the truth. And I actually read a lot more about that. And Mike, your book is fascinating. I've almost completed it. I do have to say the writing, and especially both cultures, the pride, the loyalty, the fear of the men on the Japanese side, on our side, it comes across so much in the book. I'm just enthralled with the book, and thank you so much. It's helped. In my dad's later years, I think he had, I guess, what's deemed as flashbacks. They were out of context, but there were certain things that he saw, and so the book has helped a lot of the puzzle for me, and I thank you for that.
Oh, how wonderful.
Thank
How
you.
wonderful. Yeah, that is a beautifully written book and a wonderful, enthralling story. I think you hit the nail on the head there, Kathy, by calling it enthralling. I do want to say hi to Warren Goss. He's our D-Day veteran. I know I see you half on there. Hey, Warren, good to see you. We usually like to have Warren share a story, and I knew this would happen. So let's get together again this time. Also, if you want to join us tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for our happy hour, we will have 4 military chaplains talking about what it's like to serve and minister to servicemen and women in war. And I hope next week that we'll be able to get to talking with Jim Gleason, who has his own fascinating war story himself, a Vietnam veteran. Judd Hanna, also Vietnam veteran, Navy aviator, and they also have a connection to the Mississinewa. And I'd love to include them next week. So until then, take care, everybody. Have a good week. And I hope to see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.